The town looked ordinary that summer afternoon, sunlight washing over a quiet main street lined with brick fronts and diner windows. Sarah Kane stepped off the curb with a canvas bag on her arm, the kind of simple errand she had repeated 100 times since leaving the Navy 6 years before. She wore the calm of someone who had settled into routine, but beneath it lived the reflexes of a petty officer first class who had spent deployments keeping supply lines alive in places where one wrong move meant a convoy never returned. She moved steady down the crosswalk, heat rising off the asphalt, when a flash caught her eye. Not the glint of chrome from the line of parked motorcycles, but the sharp reflection off a Glock 19 raised from between two cars. In that split instant, her body remembered what her mind had not yet processed. She closed distance in 3 strides, boots striking pavement hard, and slammed her free hand into the chest of Duke Rock, the president of the biker club. The pistol cracked. The sound carried through the street like a door slammed against steel. Pain exploded across her shoulder, hot and sudden, but her stance held. Duke stumbled sideways, shock plain on his face, while Sarah stayed upright with teeth clenched and eyes sharp. The shooter vanished into the maze of side streets, leaving behind the smell of burnt powder and the ringing silence that follows a shot fired in daylight. Bystanders froze mid-step. A waitress in the diner doorway dropped a tray, the clatter echoing as no one dared move closer. Duke's men reacted late, eyes wide, scanning alleys with curses under their breath. Sarah pressed her palm against her shoulder, steadying her breath with the discipline drilled into her years ago during live fire drills. She had taken worse, she told herself, and staying upright mattered more than showing pain. The entire street seemed to hold its breath, caught between disbelief and awe. Blood dripped slow from her sleeve, darkening the edge of the grocery bag that still hung stubbornly from her arm. In that moment, an unspoken truth settled on every witness. A stranger had stepped into the line of fire, and a debt had been written in blood. Sarah's days had settled into a rhythm far quieter than the years she once knew. Her leather repair shop sat 2 blocks from the center of town, the kind of place where neighbors brought in old jackets and worn saddlebags, trusting her hands to give them another life. The work was modest, the hours steady, and the silence was something she had learned to appreciate after a career where silence was rare. She had left the Navy 6 years earlier with little ceremony, closing the chapter as a petty officer first class who specialized in logistics. Deployments had taken her across deserts and through forward operating bases where she coordinated convoys that carried everything from food to ammunition. She remembered nights when maps were spread under red lights, her pencil circling routes while the sound of engines idled outside. Every decision measured against the risk of an ambush. Sometimes her work tied directly into the fight above. She had overseen supply lines that kept A-10 Warthogs fueled and armed, ensuring pilots had what they needed when ground troops called for close air support. There was nothing glamorous in loading pallets or verifying manifests. But each box checked meant someone downrange had a better chance of making it home. Years of watching patterns, counting crates, and double-checking routes left her with instincts that never dulled. In her shop, she moved with the same quiet precision, every stitch measured and every repair deliberate. Customers saw only a woman with steady hands and a calm voice, not the weight of experience that had once kept convoys alive on foreign soil. The town knew her as Sarah the shopkeeper, but she still carried the discipline of Sarah the sailor, a quiet readiness that surfaced without warning when the world around her shifted. The reflection reached her eyes before her mind had time to label it. It was sharp, out of place, and years of scanning convoys for the hint of an ambush left no doubt about what it meant. Her body reacted before thought could form, muscles moving in the same rhythm that had been drilled during countless drills overseas. She lunged forward, shoving Duke square in the chest with one hand and twisting her own body into the path of danger. The Glock fired, the report cracking down the street and echoing off brick. Heat tore through her shoulder, a force that spun her half around. But her boots stayed planted, and her grip on the grocery bag did not falter. Pain rushed in, bright and heavy, yet her breathing stayed even, controlled like the way she had trained under fire. She steadied herself, weight balanced, eyes sweeping the street the way she once checked ridgelines for muzzle flashes. The shooter dissolved into the alleys, gone in seconds. But Sarah stood in the open, blood darkening her sleeve, calm in the silence that followed. The shot still hung in the air when the street went silent. Plates clattered inside the diner. Then, nothing. Every face turned toward Sarah, frozen as if the world itself had stopped moving. Duke caught himself against the wall, his chest rising fast, his eyes locked on her. He looked down at the mark of her hand on his vest, then up again, struggling to understand why she was the one bleeding. The disbelief on his face carried more weight than words ever could. Bikers spilled from the diner, boots pounding hard against the pavement. They fanned out with practiced speed, eyes cutting down alleys, hands tightening on belts, anger written clear. Bystanders backed away, the hush broken only by the scrape of shoes on concrete. Sarah stood with her palm pressed to her shoulder, jaw set against the sting, her posture steady. Blood marked the denim, but her balance never faltered, as if pain had been trained into silence. She scanned the street once, confirming no second threat, then let her breathing settle. The first distant rise of sirens came faint through the air, winding closer with each second. People who had been brave enough to peek from doorways stepped back again, unsure of what line had just been crossed. The tension held thick, like the town itself was waiting for permission to exhale. Duke finally stepped toward her, his broad frame blocking some of the curious stares. His voice was low, meant only for her, steady despite the tremor in his jaw. He said she had saved his life, and the look in his eyes left no space for argument. The first video went online before the ambulance even reached the street. A teenager who had been standing outside the diner caught everything on his phone. The single shot, the chaos, and Sarah still on her feet with blood running down her arm. By the time the sirens faded into the distance, the clip was already being replayed in living rooms and gas station booths across town. It showed Duke's men forming a circle around her, their leather jackets tight against the crowd as if she belonged to them. Sarah stood in the center, calm and upright, the grocery bag still hanging from her wrist. The detail struck viewers more than the blood did. A picture of control in the middle of panic. Within hours, the video found its way onto local feeds. Comments stacked up fast, some from people who knew her as the quiet shopkeeper, others who had only seen her in passing. The tone was always the same, disbelief at what she had done and awe at how she carried herself afterward. The biker community moved even quicker. On forums filled with chrome and patch colors, her image was reposted again and again. The words "she saved Duke" attached like a badge. Riders from other towns argued over her name, some calling her the Navy woman, others just the stranger who stepped in. By nightfall, the town was already whispering in corners. Customers lingered longer in her shop. Neighbors lowered their voices when she passed. She was no longer just Sarah who fixed jackets and belts. She had become the woman who stood in front of a bullet and stayed standing. It began as a low murmur that rolled across the edge of town. 3 hours after the shot, the sound built into a steady thunder, the kind that vibrated through window glass and rattled picture frames on living room walls. By the time the first headlights swept down Main Street, people were already stepping onto porches, drawn out by the force of it. The line of Harley Davidsons stretched farther than most could count, chrome catching the late light, pipes firing in perfect rhythm. One by one they poured into town, not for show and not for leisure, but in a formation that spoke of unity. The roar of so many engines together was less noise and more presence, a wave of steel and leather moving as one. Storefront lights flickered as the vibration pressed against the panes. Drivers on cross streets froze in place, letting the line pass like a tide too strong to interrupt. Children on bicycles stood at the curb with wide eyes, their parents behind them with quiet faces that carried both fear and respect. Each rider wore colors clear and unbroken, patches visible under the glow of street lamps. Helmets reflected the beams in quick flashes, and boots struck pavement with a rhythm that matched the engines. There were no wheelies, no reckless moves, nothing to suggest joy. This was a statement, deliberate and heavy. From above, The convoy looked like a living artery cutting through the town, red taillights glowing in a line that refused to break. The synchronized growl pressed into every ear, leaving no one in doubt of what had been set in motion. The town had never seen 120 bikes roll together like this. And as the formation carried forward, awe hung over the silence that followed in its wake. The garage smelled of gasoline and old oil, the kind of air that clung to leather and steel. Duke stood at the head of a long workbench, the surface cluttered with maps marked in grease pencil. Around him, the riders closed ranks, the roar of their bikes outside muffled but steady. The shooter had a name now. Kyle Mercer, a small-time enforcer for the Black Vultures who had tried to take his shot in broad daylight. Duke's voice carried even without volume. He laid out the plan with the kind of certainty that ended arguments before they began. Mercer was holed up in a chop shop on the south end, a place known for hiding stolen frames and stripped engines. They would not charge in blind. 2 squads would block the outer streets. 2 more would hold the alleys, and Duke's crew would drive the main approach. Radios were passed around, old Motorola handsets with earpieces tested and clipped into vests. Riders checked batteries, keyed mics, and called short bursts to confirm signal. Hand gestures set assignments, simple and sharp, the kind that could be read even with engines drowning voices. No one asked if the plan was dangerous. In their world, loyalty was not negotiated. Outside, more bikes rolled in, headlamps cutting long beams through the open doors. The numbers swelled as nearby chapters joined, their jackets carrying the same colors, their presence making the plan feel less like vengeance and more like a deployment. Riders paired up, designating lead and trail, making sure no stretch of road would be left uncovered. Duke finished with a single nod, and helmets snapped on like a row of closing visors. Kickstands folded back in near unison. The sound of engines built again, each throttle twist sinking into a growl that filled the night. When they rolled out, it was not chaos but precision. A convoy, moving with the purpose of men who understood both risk and duty. The fluorescent lights in the hospital room buzzed with a faint hum that never seemed to fade. Sarah sat propped against thin pillows, her arm bound in a clean white sling, the sharp scent of antiseptic filling the air. A doctor had already come and gone, reminding her that the bullet had passed clean through and she was lucky. She knew luck by other names. She remembered convoys crawling along desert roads. Her clipboard balanced on her knee as she logged pallets of water and ammunition while the sound of distant gunfire rolled across the horizon. She remembered the way every stop felt like an invitation for trouble. Yet every truck still had to keep moving. Supplies kept people alive, and her role was to make sure nothing fell through the cracks. Now she looked at the bandage and thought about weight. Not the sling or the wound, but the invisible load that never left veterans when they came home. The weight of memories, of decisions made in seconds, of knowing that sometimes the quietest jobs carried the heaviest responsibility. In the stillness of the room, she breathed slowly, letting the calm remind her that she had carried heavier burdens before. The door opened with the creak of heavy boots against tile, and Duke stepped inside like he had no doubt he belonged there. His leather vest looked out of place under the hospital's bright lights, but his expression was steady, his eyes fixed on her as if measuring something beyond the sling and bandage. He stopped at the foot of the bed, hands in his pockets, silent for a moment before saying she should not be out of bed at all. Sarah kept her gaze calm, answering that she was not the bed rest type and she was fine. The round had missed anything important. His eyes narrowed, not with disbelief but with the kind of assessment she had seen in officers weighing a decision. He told her she did not have to step in front of him. Yet she did. She looked away and said it was simple. Where she came from, you do not watch someone take a hit if you can stop it. The faintest flicker crossed his mouth, almost a smile, before he pulled a small card from his vest. He set it on the table beside her water cup, only a number written across it. He said loyalty does not ask permission. It binds once given. She told him he was not her responsibility. He shook his head and replied it was already too late. The words carried no threat, only weight. And in the quiet that followed, they both understood something had shifted. The chop shop sat on the edge of the south end, its corrugated siding rusted and its yard cluttered with stripped frames. The roar of the Harleys quieted as the formation closed in, engines dropping to idle until the air vibrated in a low, steady growl. Two squads peeled off to block the feeder streets, pairs of riders dismounting to hold intersections with headlights aimed outward. Radios crackled with short-clipped reports, each unit confirming position before falling silent again. Duke's lead pack slowed at the front gate, their formation tightening until the bikes fanned in a half-circle across the lot. The padlock on the chain link had already been broken, swaying faintly in the breeze. Two riders moved into the alley, helmets tilted as they swept for movement, while another pair circled wide to cover the rear fence. Every step mirrored convoy tactics learned the hard way, deliberate and precise, no wasted motion. Inside the lot, the light was dim, a single overhead lamp casting a pool across the cracked asphalt. Shadows stretched long across the ground, broken only by the glint of chrome from the bikes. Riders kept their radios low, one hand steady on handlebars, the other free for quick signals. No one shouted, the weight of silence pressing heavier than raised voices could. Duke dismounted, boots crunching on gravel as he walked forward alone. His men stayed where they were, engines idling in rhythm like a heartbeat behind him. He stopped just past the gate and called Mercer's name, his voice carrying even without volume. For a few seconds there was no answer, only the faint scrape of metal from inside the building. Then a figure appeared in the shadows of the doorway, shoulders hunched, cap pulled low. Mercer stepped into the light and hesitated, eyes darting across the rows of riders and the wall of silent faces. His voice came thin as he tried to sound steady, asking if Duke needed an army just to talk. The answer was already written in the way the bikers held the perimeter, their presence a reminder that loyalty never moved alone. The engines around the lot rumbled low when another sound rose in the distance, a single Harley approaching from the darkened street. Heads turned as the bike rolled into view, smaller than the rest but steady in its line. Sarah cut the engine just beyond the half-circle and swung her leg over with care, her bandaged shoulder stiff beneath the denim jacket. The murmurs faded. Even Duke's men paused, as if unsure what she meant to do. She walked past the front row of bikes, each rider watching in silence. Her steps were measured, not hurried, her jaw set against the ache that tugged at every movement. Pain shadowed her face, but resolve held her posture straight. She stopped a few feet from Duke, her gaze fixed on the man standing in the glow of the lamp. Mercer tried to smirk, asking if this was the woman he had heard about, the one they now called a hero. Sarah's voice stayed level as she told him he was not worth that word. Her tone was calm, almost quiet, but it cut sharper than a shouted threat. The weight of it showed in the twitch of his jaw, the way his eyes flicked toward the alleys as if searching for an escape. Duke shifted slightly, giving her space without needing to speak. Sarah took one more step forward, enough that Mercer could see the dark edges of the sling under her jacket. She told him he had aimed for the wrong person, but had still missed the point. And that mistake would not be forgotten. The words carried no heat, only certainty. At Duke's signal, two riders emerged from the shadows, closing the alley behind Mercer, while another pair stepped from the far side of the building. The circle tightened until there was nowhere left for him to move, hands clamped onto his arms in one smooth motion. His protests swallowed by the engines as throttles snapped open. Sarah stood still, shoulder throbbing, her eyes fixed on him as the bikers pulled him into their hold. In that moment, her calm was louder than any roar. The convoy rolled out slow at first, the rumble of engines building as 120 bikes pulled into formation. Mercer was wedged between two heavy riders, his arms pinned, his cap tilted down to hide the fear in his face. No one shouted. No threats were tossed into the night. The sound of the machines said enough. Together they moved through the narrow streets, exhaust echoing off brick walls until the town seemed to vibrate under the weight of it. Storefront windows shook as they passed, neon signs flickering in the reflection of chrome. People stepped onto porches and sidewalks, phones raised. but no one tried to stop what was happening. This was not a mob. It was a message carried on two wheels at a time. Steady and deliberate. Each intersection was covered by pairs of riders who dismounted to hold traffic back until the column cleared, then fell in again with practiced ease. It looked less like chaos and more like a convoy that had rehearsed its route. They did not take the main highway. Duke guided them through side streets and narrow lanes where the sound pressed against every window. At a corner gas station, a small crowd gathered, watching silently as Mercer's head snapped side to side, the realization sinking in that he was not in control of anything. The convoy made no detours. Their course was direct, the destination unspoken, but certain. 10 miles out of town, the road bent toward the river. A wide gravel lot opened where truckers sometimes stopped to rest. Tonight it became the stage for a lesson. The column fanned out in a crescent, bikes idling low, taillights casting a red glow that stretched across the ground. Mercer was pulled from his seat and stood alone in the center, surrounded by leather and steel. The circle of engines pulsed like a living wall. Duke dismounted, his steps heavy against the gravel, and stopped in front of him. He told Mercer this was where it ended. Not with blood, not with a body on the pavement, but with the kind of memory that would follow him every time he thought about pulling a trigger again. The silence after his words was broken only by the steady growl of Harley's, a sound that carried more weight than any threat. Mercer shifted, his shoulders hunched, and when Duke stepped back, the path out was clear. No one laid another hand on him. He walked into the dark, the sound of his boots fading into the night until only the bikes remained. Engines roared again as the convoy pulled out, leaving the gravel lot behind and returning toward town. They kept their spacing tight, headlights cutting sharp lines through the trees. From her apartment balcony, Sarah watched the glow approach, then pass beneath her. The sound filled the air, rattling the rail under her hand. She stood with her sling and denim jacket, her face calm, listening as the thunder rolled past and stretched into the distance. She thought of the convoys she once tracked across desert maps, each line drawn for supplies that kept people alive, the discipline of keeping trucks moving, of making sure every crate and gallon of fuel reached its mark. Tonight, the sight of so many riders in unison carried the same weight. It was not war, but it was not play either. It was loyalty made visible, loud enough that the whole town could feel it. By the next morning, whispers had already shifted. The shopkeeper with steady hands was no longer just a quiet veteran who kept to herself. Neighbors nodded at her on the street, some with respect, others with unease, but all with recognition. The video of her bleeding, but upright, still circled online, now paired with clips of the convoy sweeping through town. The legend was writing itself without her help. Sarah rinsed her coffee cup and set it on the counter, the routine grounding her in the quiet. She did not seek credit, and she did not want the eyes that now followed her. What mattered was something simpler, the lesson carved into her life both in uniform and out. When you stand for someone, the right people will stand for you, louder than the world expects. The roar of engines that still echoed in her memory proved it, a loyalty louder than fear itself.